her, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I no more to you than 10 sons? And they had eaten. After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord, and she was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. And she continued praying before the Lord. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth.
Thank you for the reading. Today's message, I'll just share from the title, A Fulfilled Pledge. A fulfilled pledge. Just a bit of context as to the time when all this was happening. So this was happening at a time when Eli was both the high priest of Israel and he was also the judge. So Eli judged Israel for over, Eli judged Israel for about 40 years. So Eli was a blameless man when it came to the service of the Lord. His weakness was his two sons, whom he failed to discipline. These two sons of Eli misused or defiled the sacrifices which were supposed to be presented to the Lord. And these two sons would sleep with the women who would sit at the door of the temple. So these are men who were supposed to take over from Eli, but Eli's weakness was his failure to discipline his children. And this is around the same time which we read about in Judges 21, and the last verse of Judges, where the Bible records that in those days Israel had no king and everyone did as they pleased. So during that time when Eli was both high priest and judge of Israel, we are told about this man called Elkanah, who had two wives, Peninnah and Hannah, and that he would go and worship at the temple where the sons of Eli were priests, these very sons who would defile the sacrifices of the Lord and would sleep with the women at the door. So he would go and worship there, and we are told of his love for Hannah, where he gave her a double portion. And when the rival to Hannah would tease her or afflict her for being childless, he would comfort her and ask her if he was not enough than 10 children. And so at this particular time, looking at all this which was happening, and the Bible records that Elkanah would go to the temple for worship at Shiloh every year. He would go there. At this particular time, when Hannah is tormented by the rival, she takes the anguish in prayer and she prays a prayer to the Lord and makes a vow or a pledge to say, Lord, if you look down on me and bless me with a son, I will give him back to you and he will save you in the temple for all his life. Now, if we read on down, we find out that God did indeed bless Hannah with a child. And when he blessed Hannah with a child, this time, as the custom was in verse 21, somewhere there, the husband is about to go for worship. And let me just read from verse 21. When her husband Elkanah went up with all his family to offer the annual sacrifice to the Lord and to fulfill his vow, Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, after the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him before the Lord, and he will live there always. Do what seems best to you. Her husband, do what seems best to you. Her husband Elkanah told her, stay here until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord good his word. So the woman stayed at home and nursed her son until he had been weaned. After he was weaned, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with a 3-year-old bull, an elf of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. So what we see here is once Hannah prays this prayer and makes a pledge to the Lord blesses her with a child. And this is a woman who has been barren. And once she receives this child, she does not go for the annual worship. She decides to remain back and nurse the child and still remembers her pledge to the Lord, which she made, which we saw in verse 11. And once the boy is weaned, she takes him to the temple to save there. Now, looking at the situation of Hannah, she had reasons as to why she would have denied taking the child to the Lord after she was blessed. I'm sure most of us at one point or another have found ourselves praying a similar prayer to Hannah to say, Lord, if you bless me with this, I will do this. But once the blessing comes, we forget what we said in prayer to the Lord and do to the contrary. But what we see with Hannah is a woman who had no guarantee that after giving her child to the Lord, she would be blessed with more children. Her prayer was for the child who would be given back and to save the Lord. There were no guarantees that she would get other children after giving Samuel to the Lord, but she still did as she pledged. So my challenge to us this evening, having gone through all that, even as we are presenting our petitions unto the Lord in this month of prayer, is that let us remember when we make pledges to the Lord, whether it is in prayer or it is at a meeting, because there are a lot of pledges which are made either in the eyes of people or in the privacy of our closets as we pray. There are a lot of promises which are made to the Lord, and when the Lord blesses, the question is, do we fulfill the pledges that we make to the Lord? Are we like Hannah, who fulfilled her pledge even though she had no guarantee that God would bless her with many children? She still let go of her only child at the time, took him to the temple, and as she had promised the Lord. So the challenge I'm leaving with you is, do you fulfill the pledges, or have you fulfilled the pledges which you have made in prayer and pledges which you have made before the eyes of people to the service of the Lord? And this is the brief sharing for today. And so at this particular point in time, I'll I'll call for any contributions before we can get started with prayer.